Your phone contains more entertainment than an ancient king could have experienced in a lifetime. Games, videos, music, messages, films, and an endless supply of people arguing in comment sections. Yet somehow, you can open your phone, scroll through everything, close it, and still feel bored. Which raises a strange question. If we can become bored while carrying nearly unlimited entertainment in our pockets, what happened to humans who had none? Not people from the Middle Ages, not Romans or Egyptians. Go back tens of thousands of years before cities, farms, books, or screens. Back when entertainment could not be downloaded, streamed, or switched on. What did people do during the quiet hours? The answer may help explain why humans began decorating themselves, making music, sharing stories, and imagining worlds that did not exist. But first, we need to destroy a popular myth. We often imagine prehistoric life as one endless emergency. Wake up, find food, escape an animal, build a shelter, repeat until something eats you. If survival consumed every minute, boredom would have been a luxury early humans could not afford. Except hunter-gatherer life was not necessarily non-stop work. Research on modern and recent hunter-gatherer communities suggests that obtaining food could leave substantial time for resting, visiting, playing, and social activity. These communities are not perfect copies of prehistoric societies, but they challenge the assumption that humans always worked from sunrise until sleep. There were difficult seasons, there was hunger, danger, and uncertainty, but there were also quiet afternoons, long evenings, rainy days when nobody wanted to leave shelter, and many hours spent sitting near other people without a notification arriving every 11 seconds. So, what did the human mind do with all that unoccupied time? First, people played. That might sound unimportant, but play is one of the strangest and most useful things an intelligent animal can do. Play rehearses skills without requiring an immediate reward. It allows people to experiment, imitate, compete, and invent rules simply because the activity is enjoyable. A child throwing a stick is not necessarily hunting. Two adults making rhythmic sounds are not necessarily completing a survival task. Sometimes humans do things because doing nothing has become uncomfortable. Evidence of this experimental behavior appears in objects discovered at ancient sites. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, archaeologists found small shells that had been deliberately pierced and probably worn as beads. They are tens of thousands of years old and show that people were using objects to communicate identity and appearance. Imagine the work involved. Find the right shells, clean them, create openings without snapping them, collect pigment, arrange them on a cord. None of that puts food directly into your stomach. A bead cannot defeat a predator or keep out the rain. Its value exists inside another human mind. It can say, this is my group, this is my family, I am important, or perhaps simply, I like how this looks. That represents an extraordinary change. Humans were no longer modifying objects only to make them useful. They were changing objects to make them meaningful. Did boredom create those beads? Archaeology cannot tell us what the maker was feeling, but decoration requires experimentation, patience, and time, not entirely occupied by immediate survival. Quiet moments may have provided the space in which those experiments could happen. Then, humans began turning sound into something more. In a cave in what is now southern Germany, archaeologists discovered a carefully constructed flute made from the hollow bone of a bird. It had finger holes positioned to produce different notes. This was not random noise. Someone understood that changing the placement of their fingers changed the sound, and then transformed that discovery into an instrument. Picture the first attempts. A person blows into a bone. Nothing happens. They adjust it. A horrible squeak kills the cave. Everyone nearby regrets encouraging them, but eventually the squeak becomes a tone. The tones become a pattern, and the pattern becomes something other people recognize and remember. Music does not need to produce food to be useful. Rhythm can coordinate movement. Songs can strengthen memory. Shared music can synchronize emotion and make a group feel united. But it can also exist simply because silence invited someone to experiment. Boredom does not just demand stimulation. It pushes the mind to search for possibilities. When the world stops providing new information, the brain begins producing some of its own. It revisits memories. It predicts what might happen next. It combines things that have never been combined before. A person staring into a fire might remember yesterday's hunt, then imagine tomorrow's hunt, then imagine a hunt involving an animal larger than any they had ever seen. Now, the mind is no longer trapped in the present. It can travel backward into memory and forward into possibility. That ability became one of humanity's greatest advantages. Before people could build something new, they had to picture it. Before they could travel beyond a mountain, someone had to wonder what might be on the other side. Before they could explain lightning, death, or the stars, they had to recognize that the world contained unanswered questions. This does not mean boredom single-handedly invented imagination or religion. Human culture emerged through countless pressures, discoveries, and social changes, but mental downtime gave imagination somewhere to operate. Modern experiments support part of that idea. In some studies, participants who completed repetitive, boring activities later produced more creative responses than participants who had not performed those tasks. The effect is not magical. Being bored does not automatically transform someone into a genius. But when external stimulation decreases, attention can turn inward. The mind begins searching, associating, and wandering. And ancient humans had another powerful way to fill quiet time. They talked. Of course, conversation had practical uses. Where is the water? Which plants are safe? Did anyone else hear that noise? But humans do not limit conversation to essential information. We talk about people, who helped, who cheated, who is angry, who likes whom, who disappeared behind a bush with whom, and returned behaving suspiciously. In other words, humans gossip. Gossip sounds trivial, but in a small community, it carries valuable social information. It tells you who can be trusted, who breaks promises, and who might cooperate when danger arrives. Other primates build relationships partly through physical grooming. Grooming creates trust, but it is slow and usually involves only a few individuals at once. Conversation scales more efficiently. One person can speak while several people listen. A story can describe someone who is not present. Information can travel through an entire group without everyone witnessing the original event. Around a fire, a real event could be repeated, then exaggerated, then improved. The dangerous animal becomes enormous. The escape becomes miraculous. The hunter who tripped over a rock quietly removes that detail. Eventually, information becomes narrative. Narrative becomes tradition, and tradition allows knowledge to outlive the person who first discovered it. A useful story can teach children where not to walk. A frightening story can enforce a rule. A heroic story can explain what the group values. A story about ancestors can tell people who they are. So, the quiet hours were not necessarily empty. They may have been workshops. One person experimented with shells. Another experimented with sound. Someone watched the fire and imagined tomorrow. Someone else transformed yesterday's embarrassing accident into the group's greatest hunting legend. Over thousands of generations, these small acts accumulated into art, music, mythology, and shared culture. Now compare that ancient silence with modern life. The moment nothing happens, we reach for something. Waiting in line, phone, sitting on a bus, phone, eating alone, video, walking for 30 seconds. Better find a podcast before an original thought becomes dangerous. We have become remarkably skilled at preventing the mind from ever being unoccupied. That does not mean technology is destroying creativity. Phones can teach, connect, and inspire us. The problem begins when stimulation becomes automatic, when every empty second must immediately be filled. During quieter periods, brain systems associated with memory, self-reflection, and internally generated thought become active. The mind reviews experiences, imagines possible futures, and forms connections that may not appear while attention is fixed on an external task. That wandering is not always pleasant. Sometimes your brain produces an idea. Sometimes it reminds you of something embarrassing you said 12 years ago. But both are evidence that it is processing material without being directed by a screen. For most of human history, silence was unavoidable. There was no endless feed waiting beside the fire. If nothing interesting was happening, people had to create something interesting themselves. A pattern, a rhythm, a decoration, a question, a story. Today, we treat boredom like a malfunction that must be corrected immediately. But perhaps boredom is not the absence of mental activity. Perhaps it is the moment the outside world stops entertaining you and your mind is finally asked to contribute. Tens of thousands of years ago, someone sat in a quiet shelter and began shaping a shell. Someone lifted a hollow bone and wondered what sound it could make. Someone stared into a fire and imagined something that had never happened. Your next great idea probably will not arrive while you are desperately searching for it. It may arrive in the shower, on a silent walk, while staring through a window, or during the 30 uncomfortable seconds after you put your phone down and decide not to pick it back up. Ancient humans were not held back by empty time. They filled it with meaning, and if you can survive being bored for a few minutes, your mind might still remember how.